SALUTE stands for Save a Life, Understand Trauma Experiences. We're dedicated to transforming how society responds to trauma and interpersonal trauma. Currently, there's a big knowledge gap between the world's biggest trauma experts and professionals across the field, as well as the public at large, on the issue that affects so many of us. This lack of understanding is keeping people unwell unnecessarily and is spreading to the problem. In the most basic definition, trauma is when one's ability to cope is overwhelmed. An emotional shock followed by a stressful event or a physical injury. A deeply distressing or disturbing experience. It can happen from one large event or several small events. Whilst we was focusing on PTSD and interpersonal traumas such as abuse, the method we promote can also help people who have suffered from war, accidents and natural disasters. PTSD is much more common in certain groups of people. For example, some studies have found that PTSD develops in rape victims, prisoner of war, firefighters and emergency services, teenage survivors of car crashes. Interpersonal trauma can be carried from childhood. Up to 60% of adults reported difficulty family circumstances or reported abuse during childhood. It is critical to understand how some of the worst health and social problems in our nation can arise as a consequence of an adverse childhood experience. We recognise physical violence and sexual assault aren't the only forms of trauma, nor are domestic violence or child abuse the only contact in which abuse occurs. Interpersonal trauma is still trauma. We can all experience interpersonal trauma, a death of a loved one, a divorce, a loved one who has an addiction, abuse. Trauma is a fact of life for almost all of us. Trauma literally rewires the brain and it often leaves us with mental or physical ailments. Trauma often leaves us with things such as behavioural problems, addictions, relationship problems and illnesses. Trauma is commonly overlooked. The trauma, mental health and medical field are not integrated, and therefore trauma is commonly overlooked as a root cause for many of the toughest problems our society faces. There is hope. Brain-based body therapy using bilateral sound. Because of the neuroplasticity, or the brain's ability to be able to reorganize itself, we know with the proper treatment, healing is possible. As opposed to the more common talk therapy, which most mental health are trained in, often results in coping strategies. Rather than healing. This trauma-focused treatment that engages the survival part of the brain where the fight and flight response take place allows for the process into the trauma. When a person gets traumatized, they get traumatized not in the neocortex, because the neocortex has language, thought and content. It's underneath that neocortex in the subcortex where the trauma is experienced. In order for psychotherapists to be successful in working with trauma, they have to be able to access the part of the brain that don't have language and don't have thought, but come primarily from intuition, from emotions and from body experience. This therapy helps the individual access, process and release those stored emotions to begin their journey to recovery. It works by tapping directly into the part of the brain regulating emotions, memory, as well as the neurohormonal network of the brain. This therefore means that it promotes both mental and physical healing by regulating the brain's control of the body. It treats the whole person, mind and body. Salute, connecting those who have suffered trauma with resources necessary for healing rather than coping.